Welcome to You're Not Alone, the business podcast. I'm Justin Jawanda from Bishop Collins, and today I have a very special guest, Dr. Lisa Barnes. That's right, she's a doctor. She's also a CEO of the Central Coast Conservatorium of Music, as well as being a chartered accountant. So, this special guest has got a lot to tell us about many things that are related to not only being a CEO, but also being an eminently qualified doctor, as well as how to manage those intricate relationships between herself, the board, and leadership. So welcome, Lisa.
Thank you, Justin. Appreciate that.
Can you start off by telling us, and I think this is always the nicest thing about having a nice relaxed seat, is that we feel so comfortable that we start opening up about our deepest, darkest secrets and our true superpowers. You've got a lot of superpowers, in my opinion, because I've had the pleasure of working with you for quite a while. But before we talk about those superpowers and those challenges that you have, could you tell us a little bit about who you are? Who is Dr. Lisa Barnes?
Well, thank you. So my background is that I actually, as you clearly stated before, I'm a chartered accountant, so I worked in accounting firms locally for some time. Then I moved into academia. It basically was sort of a default. I was asked to do some tax law lectures, and I actually fell in love with teaching. So I taught for about 20 odd years. I have a deep love of music and always have had. So when I saw the position come up for the Conservatorium CEO, I thought it's probably time that I stopped teaching and actually start doing. So by that time, I'd completed an MBA, and then I did my doctorate in governance. So I thought a CEO was probably the next step for me. And it's the role of a CEO, you never quite understand the intricacies of it until you actually do it. And when you're in a small not-for-profit, it's very challenging. It's actually, the CEO actually stands for Chief Everything Officer, because you actually literally do everything. So yes, I have unplugged toilets, and I have driven a van full of timpani drums and music stands. But I've also fronted the board, to talk about financial challenges that we have and opportunities that we have as a conservatorium to grow. So it's wearing lots of hats, dealing with lots of people, but I have a very supportive team. It's challenging when you have a board with lots of differing opinions, but I actually value that because it means that we're looking at decisions based on a lot of different opinions, and hopefully that means we make better decisions. Having such a small staff base, we really do work very hard together as a team. And at the end of the day, we're providing students with music education and performance opportunities, and it's extremely rewarding. So it's one of those things that, we've got to keep very clear hands on our finances. And I appreciate the fact that you and I meet. The CEO role can be a bit lonely, if I'm to be honest. You're sort of stuck between staff on one hand and then the board on the other. So I find our monthly catch-ups in particular is a great sounding board for me to put out ideas, but also for us to talk about strategy and how we do move the conservatorium forward, because it is an old-fashioned industry that I'm in, but it's also very valuable. Yeah,
look, I want to go more into that side because at a later date, later in our conversation, but I want to find out a little bit more about Lisa the person. When you were growing up and as you were sort of understanding more about life, and why did you choose accounting?
I've always loved numbers, always. As a student at school, maths was my subject that I always enjoyed. But I do remember my first interview as an accountant, as a graduate, that the person that was interviewing me actually said, "You do know that accounting has nothing to do with maths." And I was quite shocked. I was like, but I really enjoy maths.
I don't think that's true. I disagree with
But
you.
I think what he was actually alluding to is that you're using the numbers, historical numbers, to make better decisions for the future. Yes. So it's not so much about 1 + 1 is 2. It's more about, but do I want 2 or do I want 3 or 5 going forward?
Yeah, okay.
So it's actually quite interesting.
That's quite, okay, that's from that perspective, I understand that, because also, pure maths or doing maths is like analysing theory and analysing problems and solving problems. And we probably don't solve problems in a mathematical sense. The maths is what it is.
Yes,
although
can't go change
as
it.
you said, we can sort of show a different light of the numbers, but then it's how you interpret it or do something about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, I used to get frustrated when I was a practicing accountant that I'd prepare these beautiful budgets, monthly budgets for clients, and I'd send them away and they'd come back 12 months later and I'd say, how did you go? And they were like, what do you mean? And I said, did you look at your budgets every month? Did you change your decisions? Did you do things differently because the numbers told you that? No. And I was like, oh, well, it's too late now. It's 12 months down the track. I can't help you for things that you could have done every month the last 12 months.
Yeah.
So I actually like the fact that numbers, to me, say there's safety in numbers because the numbers tell me a story.
Yes.
And that story I can then utilise to change the way we do things for the future.
Yes. I have noticed one of the things that I find really rewarding with our meetings, and when I do virtual CFO support for different clients, with you in particular, you have this knowledge about, it's coming through in what you're saying now. You're one of the rare people that will look at the numbers and then make some decisions about just purely those numbers and analyze it and apply it into how you can do something better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can give you a great example of that.
Yeah, can you give me an example of that? Because you've done a few things and I've got a few, but I'd love to hear your one.
And I know you were involved in this decision in particular, but I do remember lamenting one month about how much we spend on repairs and maintenance to our instruments. Now, we have an instrument hire business that we utilise to send into the schools because we teach into about 25 local public schools. And part of that was encouraging the students to pick up an instrument. We bought a whole lot of instruments and we hired them out. And that was an initiative for about 10 years ago. But we're now finding these instruments are old. So we're spending awful amount of money on repairing and maintaining, buying new ones. And I remember lamenting to you, and then you sort of said to me, well, is it your core business? And I kind of went, well, no, our core business is teaching music. We did the hire business to try to encourage more students to do it, but our school program is so great now that students will find their instruments their own way, online or, the neighbours or whatever it'll be. And I remember thinking, this is not our core business. So I went back and did the numbers. And over the last 5 years, we'd lost 44 instruments, just gone. Don't even know where they are. We've been spending, thousands and thousands repairing and maintaining old instruments. And looking in towards the future, because of the old instruments, I know that we would have to have a fairly significant investment in new instruments going forward. And doing that business case, I just thought, well, this is not our core business. Why are we even doing it? So we actually got rid of our hire instrument business. And it has saved us significant amounts of dollars. And interestingly enough, we panicked thinking we may have lower numbers in our schools program, but that is not the case at all. So, and that was one of the instances where just by looking at the numbers, we kind of went, well, hang on a minute, why are we doing this? And I think that's the whole point of having bouncing ideas is to do things better.
Yeah. You just said the thing that I was wanting to lead into, doing things better. Yeah. Because in a corporate profit-driven business, I think that comment is said in tongue-in-cheek, doing things better, but really we're trying to make more profit. You're in an NGO or a charity, which is even stronger than an NGO in my opinion in terms of its ownership or its responsibility to society because people are contributing money and donating. How does, and this is we're going off script here, which is great. I love this because how do you manage as a CEO the competing forces of profit or sustainability, which I suppose you're going to, that's probably what it really is in an NGO or a charity, with the responsibility of being a charity and using that money responsibly for people who've invested it?
So being a small not-for-profit, we're very lucky that we do get some funding from the Department of Education to help with our schools program, so our delivery of music into schools. And, from a community perspective, we deal with a lot of stakeholders that we work closely with. So we work with other performers such as Central Coast Concert Band, Central Coast Philharmonia Choir, Symphony Central Coast, and we partner with them to provide performance opportunities for our students. But at every occurrence, we've always got to think, well, what is this event costing us? But also, what is it doing for our students? So our students get such wonderful opportunities to perform with with each other, but also with bigger organisations. And it brings music to the community, which is basically what we're here to do. We're here to educate, but also to provide performance opportunities and for the community to appreciate music and the arts on the Central Coast. And it is awfully challenging because we want to do so much more. But we are limited by, the funding that we get and also the income that we generate from providing music lessons. So it is a constant battle, and sustainability
it's actually harder than a profit-driven model, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Because you've included another complexity here, which is the government. So
Yes.
you've got the government, you've got people who donate, which could be things like some banks.
Yes.
Bendigo Bank, if I can say
yes,
that.
yeah.
They've donated some money.
It
could be community, it could be people who've just donated their own money, high net worth individuals, estates, etc.
Yep.
And then you've got, the students' parents who pay money themselves for their kids. So you've got all these different stakeholders that are demanding certain things, and some of them are competing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you might have an event which is, the government wants you to do an event, or there's a service you must do, or you've got money for, but it's going to be very expensive and probably not profitable, and probably needs to draw on funds somewhere else. How do you manage that?
It's a huge challenge. So an example I can give you is we got a grant from Central Coast Council. We're going to be running a music camp in the next school holidays. The challenge for us is that obviously we have to pay staff for that, and we want to make sure that the students get a good quality camp where they're actually learning things, they're having fun, and most importantly making music together. The challenge though is that we don't have purpose-built music facilities, so we're located in the old courthouse/jail on 45 Man Street.
Yep.
We don't actually have a space that's big enough for an orchestra, so we actually have to rent space from local churches to enable us to have our big timpani drums and 30, 40 students performing. We have the beautiful Robert Knox Hall, but it only has 75 seats in it, and it's not big enough for an orchestra. So facilities management, for example, is a huge challenge for us. You talked about government bodies. Well, one of our buildings is owned by Crown Lands, the other is by council. So the joys of bureaucry
and now you've got
are another challenge.
You just added another layer of complexity.
Yeah, so it is. I always think of it as a juggling act. So I often think of myself on a skateboard, but one of those skateboards with a little ball in the middle, so you're juggling up and down.
Yes.
And the little balls that I'm juggling is like stakeholders and government and Crown Lands and parents and students. And you drop one of the balls and you're thinking, well, how do I pick that one up without... So that it's a constant juggle. I really love it though. I really enjoy it. And when I'm lucky enough to go and see things like our premier ensemble concerts, which is where our orchestras and our choirs perform, it's worth the journey.
Okay.
It really is worth that juggle.
Okay. I want to talk about something else, because there's a character trait in you that I have experienced through working with you, which I've really enjoyed, and that is there's a strong humility in you. I find that you're eminently qualified, you're exceptionally clever, you're very good at analysing things. However, you don't ever take credit for it, or you don't ever sort of big note yourself. I think that's fair to say that you're an extremely humble person. I think you would agree with me.
Yes.
And likewise, there's something I want to know about how you use that in leadership. And I'm going to put you on the spot here if I can, and that is maybe tell me a bit about your definition of leadership, but maybe a story about yourself, about you've become a leader. I would say you've probably most of your life naturally been a leader of your own definition. Have you got a story there that sort of you can share around your leadership journey?
Yeah. So I think, and you are right. I don't big note myself. I don't like to take compliments. Very uncomfortable hearing you say all those lovely things. But for me, I've always seen myself as being what I call a servant leader. Mm-hmm. So I'm one of these people that, even though I might have the leadership hat on, I tend to be very consultative with people. And I like to get people's opinions so that I can make a decision and lead them to where we're going. But more importantly, that they're happy to follow. And this is what's most important, is that I think some leaders who are dictator type leaders, the followers don't want to be there. And you can't achieve things without getting the followers. So I spent a lot of time getting to know our teachers because I think they're very valuable in terms of where the organisation will go in the future. And I don't think in the past they've had that sort of consultative process before, though they felt very sort of isolated and not part of the con. And I can actually hand on heart say that my colleagues, the teachers at the conservatorium, will follow me. And have followed me and will at oftentimes push and prod me to keep going so they can follow me. And it's and I think it's that relationship building was where I see my leadership as being. So I'm very humanistic when it comes to my staff. I very much like to know about their families and their circumstances because we all have a story and we all know that things happen in our families and our private lives and that can affect our working life. So I make sure that I'm very personable and, how are children going and, if someone's unwell and all those sorts of things. It doesn't seem like much, but it actually creates a really strong, deep relationship with that person.
And then a loyalty.
Absolutely, yes. And I had a lovely compliment from a staff member on the weekend actually, and she sent me through a text and she said, look, I'm really sorry. She said, I really apologise because every time I approach you, it's because I'm frustrated about something. And she said, but please note, I understand that you're the sandwich between the board and us and we really appreciate you. And and that's why I do the job is because I know that, it makes staff happy. Staff are happy. They teach their beautiful students. The students perform well. They're so proud. The parents are wonderful. And it's a wonderful, when you go to a concert and you have that community experience of well-being, it's all worth it.
So you have a consultative.
Very much so, yeah.
An encompassing, an empathetic and a relationship style of leadership, which are all sort of I would say, are the softer sides of leadership.
Very much so, yes.
Whereas a masculine role or a masculine approach could be a little bit more assertive, maybe aggressive.
Yeah.
And I think that's dying out now because it's been proven to not be sustainable. But there's got to be a time where you have to be assertive.
There is.
How do you do that? Can you give me a story about that and how you've had to lay the law down or say a hard decision or make a hard decision?
Yeah. No,
in the way that your style of leadership is.
Yeah. So I could probably give you an example of we know that staff sometimes do incorrect things, and whether or not it's planned or not, and oftentimes you will have to discipline staff. I find that uncomfortable, but it is part of the job. It's just it is what it is. So the style that I've seen in the past is that basically they just lay down the law and say this was wrong, you did it wrong, that's it. What I tend to do is I take a bit of a sort of a counselling type approach and actually say, look, this is the situation. Would you like to tell me about what happened and why you think you're now in this situation? So rather than just saying you did something wrong, here's the penalty, I actually make it a learning experience so they can actually say, look, actually, I didn't act very well. And the reason was because I did this. And then I say to them, well, okay, how can I help you if you have a similar scenario in the future so that this behaviour doesn't happen again? And so I make it a solution-focused discipline meeting. So they walk out of there rather than negative.
Self-responsibility one I can see. You're making them own the problem, which is the only way that you'll get a solution out of it from them that'll last rather than lip service or fear.
Exactly. And so what it is that I had a staff member come in thinking, I'm in trouble. This is going to be horrible. And they walked out and they thanked me for the proceedings because not only did they learn, they reflected, but they appreciated that I took the time to actually listen and help them.
You gave the support.
Yep.
Brilliant. I love it. So as a woman in a leadership role, it's actually very rare. I shouldn't say it's very rare. Let me say that again. If I were to give you stats, and I might just look at my sheet here if you don't mind, because the stats show that where are my stats? Oh, we're already over here. We're going everywhere because you're so interesting that we're going through different areas. And so 22% of CEOs in Australia are women, and only 36% of key management positions are held by women. Now, we might say that, we're in there was another really interesting bit of data there around in the conservatorium and in music there. While there's a higher prevalence of women in management positions in, say, in music or in the arts, there's not a high percentage of women in a leadership role in the executive position. I would love to get your take on the gender role of women in leadership, and you've expressed how you do that internally within within your working environment to staff. But there must be a challenge that you have outside where there's this expectation that you've got to, this is the CEO of the conservatorium and they're expecting you to be something. And I'm going to put it out there, but I've seen CEO women who can be very assertive and dominant, and they'll be quite let's say assertive. That's the word.
Yeah.
However, you don't have that. You have more of I'd say an elegance, but still a presence. So can you tell me about that and whether there's some challenges of stories that you've had to deal with and how you deal with it?
Yeah. So, I would agree with you. It's for females to be in a leadership position, particularly those who have families, so have possibly taken some time out. We always feel like we're a little bit behind, say, our colleagues that we graduated with from university, because we've had that time out, and the expectation is usually that we are the mother of the children, and so when one gets sick, they kind of call us rather than dad, and all that sort of thing, and that's fine. But from a female, for me in particular, I wanted to be a good role model. So I have two girls, and I wanted them to always be able to look up to me and say, you know what, Mum could do this, I can do this. And so I once I had my family, I was determined that I like being a leader. I actually quite enjoy leading people and making change. And I remember going to to a conference in Australia. And a person was lamenting that boards in Australia, and this is probably about 10 years ago, but boards in Australia were populated by male, pale and stale board members. And I thought that is fantastic.
I love that.
So I thought, well, I'll cross out the male, and now I guess I think I'm still pale and stale, but that's okay. But it really rang true to me that as a female, we have got a role in society to play, and we are good leaders. So there's just no question. I think the challenge for us is getting supportive people to help us, to push us. I once had a colleague at the University of Newcastle say to me, it's time for promotion. And I'm like, what do you mean? And the statistics show that if there's 10 points that you have to do to go for promotion, a lot of males will probably do 5 or 6 and go, yeah, go for it, let's do it. But as women, we tend to do all 10, which means it takes us longer, and I don't know if it's a lack of confidence or what it is, but we tend to hold ourselves back. And I think it's something that we have to forgive ourselves for. And it's something that we just have to sometimes say, you know what, if this person believes that I can do it, if this person believes I can do this promotion, then I should go for it. And I think sometimes that support is what we often need. I created a women's network at one of the universities I was at.
Sorry, a what, sorry?
A women's network.
Okay, yep.
Yeah, so and it was a very selfish reason for actually doing this, because I was employed in the business school and they were all male. I was the only female and I was the head of the business school. And I thought, I haven't got any friends. Okay, let's form a women's network, and then I can get to know all my friends. And it was fantastic. It was great because we actually came together. We promoted each other. We pushed each other to do great things.
Yep. Up, you have to sort of fight for your position in the pack or
and
something like that.
You
go for it. So that, can you give some advice to people in regards to this still role of women in leadership? Because I love this subject. My mother is also a very strong leader, but her style is very similar to yours. Is not combative, but she can if she needs to be.
Yeah.
Is very inclusive. Power is something she always hated. Always tried to let it go, and she used to say, the more I let it go, the more they give it to me. I'm sure you find those type of experiences as well. But if there was you talked about your two daughters and you wanted to be a good example to them. Let's say they, other daughters who don't have an example directly, but they see leaders, women who in a powerful position, could be a non-executive director, could be an executive director, could be a CEO, and they're quite assertive and dominant and combative and confrontational to try to get their attention or to get higher on the rung. What advice would you give them so that they say, oh, that's not me, I don't like that, or I don't feel comfortable? What advice would you give them?
Look, the advice I would say is that if you want people to support you and to help you with your leadership journey, you just need to be nice. It's not hard to be nice, and it's not hard to actually have and get a relationship with people. So one of the things that I certainly do at the con, and you know that I live in a little jail cell there in the con, so I'm very lucky. I call it cell 3. I always have my lovely green iron door open, and you know, at any time staff can come in and they know that they might be frustrated and they might, you know, have their voice raised. I will always be calm. I will always be nice, and I always listen. And I think people that are aggressive and need to dominate others, they're losing out on creating those relationships with people, and those people that they're losing out with will not follow them,
and they won't be loyal, and they won't give them their best, which means they won't be able to be a good leader.
Yep. So it's a very short-term approach to leadership.
I love it. Thank you. That's a wonderful expression for leadership, regardless of what sex.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'd like to share with you just another bit of data. A report by CPA Australia found that 60% of small to medium-sized organisations rely on external advisors for strategic financial input, not just compliance, or compliance being lodging tax returns, etc. You are eminently qualified. Why do you need a virtual CFO support?
I think I alluded to that before, because the CEO role, it is lonely, and you don't often get someone you can actually bounce ideas off that has the same knowledge and understanding of the numbers. Yeah. And I think sometimes it possibly is a lack of confidence on my part, but I see the numbers and I think, oh, I think this is what it means, or maybe it means, but what the meetings I have with you actually cements or solidifies what I had thought. And it's not until I can bounce those ideas off someone that I can actually then come up with a plan, do a business plan, and present something to the board.
Yes.
And I think, and the other challenge I find is that as a CEO, I don't have the time to sit and really digest the numbers as much as I'd like to. Yeah. And having you being able to do that skill, it takes that away from me. I'm like, oh, good, I know the numbers are right. Yeah. Now all we have to do is understand, well, what do the numbers mean? What are they telling us? And therefore, what decisions do I need to make going forward to better it for the organisation?
Yeah. So, you do say delving into the nitty-gritty supports you. Generally, we try to offer advice also in terms of taxation, and that's not a situation that applies to you except for, BASs and GST. So that compliance side is quite easy. But what I find, as I've said to you before, very unique is how you analyse the numbers, because you analyse them and then you take them forward and then you execute them and then you create strategy.
Yes.
So I get a lot of reward because I see the things that we do turning into a result, like the example of your equipment.
Yes, yes.
And how you turn that around from an expense, reduce the expense, and still provided a better service.
Yeah, yep.
So that's great. Thank you. You have brought up different relationships, and one of those relationships I'd love to get into now is something that all CEOs have a challenge with, and all boards have a challenge with, and that is the relationship between a board and a CEO. And you are a doctor of governance, specialising in governance.
Yes.
Can you tell me what a board should do and what a CEO should do, and then just some of your experiences in how that can in your experience, how that's sometimes causes friction?
Yeah, yeah. Look, my opinion is that a board is there to question. They should be there questioning the CEO. They should be providing strategy for the CEO and also discussing with the CEO what decisions are needed to be made in the future to ensure the sustainability of their organisation. Ultimately, board members bear the liability of the organisation. So it is their houses on the line. So it is important that they are well informed, that the relationship that they have with the CEO is one of transparency and disclosure. But it is a challenge for a CEO to have so many diverse opinions on a board. Not that I want a yes board. I don't want one of those either. But it can be a challenge when you have 8 or 9 differing opinions on a board. But that's what they're for. They are there to, as a soundboard, to talk about how the organisation's going, what things are working, what things are not working. But I've also sat on a board, and I am on a board as well, not-for-profit charity here on the Central Coast. And it is our responsibility to make sure that the organisation does survive because we are providing a community service at the end of the day. It's not something that the government can provide. So as a not-for-profit, it's our responsibility for the community to make sure that we do provide that. So it is a balancing act. It's a challenge to be a board member. It's a big challenge to be a CEO and to report to the board. And oftentimes, yes, there will be decisions that not everybody agrees with. But at the end of the day, as long as the majority agree to go forward, then that's where the organisation will go. But I certainly think it's important that board members express their opinions so that we are all on the same page in terms of maybe people's challenges or people's varying of opinions. But at the end of the day, we're all actually volunteers, or not the CEO, but the board members themselves are volunteers, and they're doing it because they love it and because they want to make a difference.
Because again, this is even harder than a private for-profit or a public company in this respect, because these people are not being paid, or often may not be paid. Some may do, but you've got to respect their opinion. You've got to take it on board, but their driver is not going to be profit.
Yes.
So there's even more opinions in there, right? It's not about profit, but I think that our purpose is to do something, is to do this, and somebody will say, no, I think it's something different. How do you deal? Like, I would say that the democratic way of doing things is 50% vote. Great, that's what's happening. Everybody else who was outvoted, keep quiet.
Yeah.
Does that always happen?
No, actually, I think the important relationship between the board and the CEO is actually the chair. The chair and the CEO must have a good working relationship because they are the ones that really control everything going forward. And I had a chat with my chair, and her opinion is that she would hope that we'd never actually have to go to a vote. She would hope that we have enough discussion, that people put their opinions on the table, and at the end of the day, the board make a decision. And it's not a vote. It's just okay, your opinion differs here, your opinion differs there. What's the best for the organisation? Then let's move on with that.
Okay, and then so a vote is the last.
Yes, it's almost like a last resort.
Last resort.
Yeah.
So there's compromise, and you try to get those that have said no, or the below 50% people, and if they and I suppose they probably have some good points.
No,
so
absolutely,
you can adjust the strategy to fit them.
Yeah, and I think when decisions are made, we put parameters around them. So I think if we don't have those parameters, then the people that initially may not have agreed with that decision, by putting parameters, risk mitigating, I guess, parameters around that decision, they feel more comfortable with then moving forward and making that decision.
So not all things are combative, right? You're actually saying how you and the chair, who's also a strong woman, are able to create this more harmonious environment, which is great. And I suppose it will fluctuate. There'll be moments of harmony, and then there'll be some disagreements, but generally you work through them and you move on, and that's
right. And that's part of the journey.
That's part of the journey.
Yeah.
But it must be lonely.
It is, and oftentimes it is, because
Because there's not two CEOs, but there's multiple directors.
So what we discuss at board level, I can't discuss with staff.
No.
And oftentimes staff disclose things to me that I can't disclose to the board. Herein is where you come in, where when we have our little monthly meetings,
you mean me from Bishop Collins Chartered Accountant?
That's the one.
Right, okay.
So that's when you and I, Justin, I'm very, as you know, I'm very honest and open with you.
Yes.
I'm very, we have had some very private conversations where I've talked to you about my challenges that I face.
Yes.
And oftentimes I feel like I'm in a counselling session because you actually push me up and say, no, you can do it. And it's not just about the numbers when you and I get together. And I think that's what's important is that you understand where I'm coming from in terms of that I have to report to a board, that I have to look after and nurture my staff. But at the end of the day, I've actually got a role to fulfill as the CEO as well. Yeah. And that's why I think the sessions that we have, and yes, I do call it session, is important because it gives me the opportunity to question what I'm doing. I get the numbers to back up why I'm questioning it and how we move forward from there. And I think that's the importance of having that one person that I can actually talk to about the challenges that I have, but then you can also point out opportunities that I have. And if we can create a big enough business case, then we do that opportunity, just like the hire of the instruments as an example.
Well, I'd like to say that I'm also very humbled by it because and when I say humbled, I don't mean you're giving me compliments and I'm humbled. I'm saying that you bring up things where I've missed them and we were actually wrong in what we've done. I'll give you, example, just a long service leave. And I went, no, that's fine. That's just this. And I thought, hang on. No, that's wrong. But you didn't point it out to me in a harsh way. You just was sitting silent there for me to figure it out. And go, really? And I went, no, you're right. Sorry, I'll go back and think of what's going on. See, that's the
teacher in me, just letting you learn.
Yeah, so I'm humbled in that regard and taught, so thank you.
But doesn't that also reflect...
It's a two-way thing.
But that also reflects that we're also human, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That we all make mistakes. And I tend to say to people, I'm in my mid-50s and I still make mistakes. But if you learn from them, it's not so bad. It's actually okay. And the thing is that, I think mistakes are what makes us human. And it also means that we have an opportunity to better ourselves by learning from it.
Yeah. So I've experienced your own leadership style myself, which has been very humbling and great. So that's lovely. So I love numbers and I love feedback and sources of document. I love numbers. We both love numbers. So the Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman did a mental health and business owner wellbeing report, and they found that nearly 50% of business owners say they feel isolated in their role, particularly when making high-stakes decisions. When we say you're not alone in business, what does that mean to you?
So I guess day-to-day running, I am very alone. However, I do have the board to bounce things off, but that's more at a strategic higher level. And I have obviously the services that you provide through your accounting at Bishop Collins, and that is that I can actually think about challenges that I have and think of it from more of an operational level that I don't get from the board because they're more at that strategic level. And operationally, you're pretty much the only person that understands the complexities of the business that we run. And people think we just teach music, but we actually run events and we have, we hire out our hall and we partner with a lot of stakeholders to, provide concerts and that sort of thing. And all of those intricacies, nobody but you and I pretty much understand that. And so that's why it's so important that when I'm feeling isolated, I know that you are simply an email or a phone call away.
Yeah, that's nice.
It does. It provides me with a level of comfort that, and oftentimes I'll just take a moment and try to think things through. But sometimes you just need that sounding board. Yeah. And I think that's...
I honestly, a lot of times you ask me a question, you already have the answer. You just want me to see whether that makes sense or not, or if there's anything negative. I just go, that sounds great.
It is nice to get confirmation.
Yeah. And of course you would have your family, because I know you're very close to your family, your daughters, and you would be, I'm sure, asking them, what do you reckon about this? So that's nice as well.
It is.
In true form, I'm going to continue with some more studies and reports because I like that. A recent Create New South Wales report, that's the Arts and Cultural Participation Research, found that 1 in 3 Australians say cost is a barrier to accessing live music or arts programs. Post-COVID, that couldn't be more important. Mm-hmm. We've all learnt how much art, music, for even those that are not huge art and music, I don't know what you call it, I'm just incapable at doing it myself, but I do appreciate it, realise how enriching it is.
It is, yeah.
But it comes at a cost.
It does. And if I can just share with you, the Conservatorium here in Central Coast is actually affiliated with the Association of New South Wales Regional Conservatoriums. So there's 17 of us all throughout New South Wales, and we are partially funded by the Department of Education. There's been a recent parliamentary inquiry into music education with recommendations 26 and 27 aimed at actually increasing the funding that regional conservatoriums have so we can have a wider reach into the community for teaching our students music. Unfortunately, of course, there's no funding for that. So even though it's a recommendation, it doesn't feel like it will actually go forward. So for us, funding is a huge challenge for us. And as I say, we're only partially funded. We have to earn our revenue like every other business.
Yeah.
And that comes at a cost. And particularly when you're in a heritage listed building that is not cheap to run, and not purpose built, it's very challenging. So we do rely as a community group and a DGR status charity. We do rely on funding and donations, and the very kind donations for people that allow us to create scholarships, for example, for our students, making music education not as expensive as it is. We have qualified staff, so we have to pay them accordingly for their qualifications. You can go to the backyard guy that's 18 and no qualifications and pay half price, or you could come to the conservatorium and get a pathway and a whole of life experience where you're not just learning the flute, but you're learning the flute and you're learning musicianship and you're in an ensemble and you're playing in an orchestra, and then you might be part of our choir and you might do a performance.
Yeah, you're making community contact.
Yep, you're part of a team sport. You're not getting into
bad habits. Yes, it's a team sport.
It is, and it's socialisation and it's well-being. So it's a whole of life journey learning music, and it shouldn't be isolating. It should be about friendship and teamwork and the opportunity to perform in front of your family and friends where they can stand up and be proud of who you are and what you're doing.
Okay, I love that. And I'm an accountant and I understand the numbers and I understand your challenges and I understand that you need to have funding. DGR that you mentioned before stands for deductible gift recipient, which means that people can get a deduction for their donation.
Correct.
We would always like to get more donations. I think the best way of doing that is by plugging those that have already supported you.
Yes.
And then saying who else might be good. Now, I know there's Bendigo Bank. Good on you, Bendigo Bank.
Yep. Edelong Diggers is another one that's recently come on board.
Yep. Edelong Diggers, that's fantastic.
Yep. Central Coast Leagues Club gives us space for our end of term concerts, which is fantastic.
Central Coast Leagues Club, we love them. Who else?
Loyal IT.
Loyal IT.
They give us money for endangered instruments such as the oboe, which is unusual. But,
fantastic.
But welcome.
Yes. And then there's been some individual people who've donated money.
Yes.
High net worth individuals, or maybe they've wanted to bequeath some money out of their will. That's always, I think, I know it sounds a bit terrible from a will, but it's also something that's left a lasting legacy.
Absolutely.
Which I find quite endearing if that has happened to me. So yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. There's lots of ways of which people can support the conservatorium. So, we at our lovely Robert Knox Hall, we've got seats there that people can actually buy a seat and put a little plaque on it, and they can have that for the rest of their life, or they can just donate, whatever they want to. And we always need things like music stands, for example. They're constantly going missing or breaking or whatever. So, little $100 will buy a music stand, and we need 50 of them. So, any small donation is very well received, and it's very welcome, and it certainly helps us to continue to do what we're doing.
So these donors that give you physical cash, they obviously get a deduction for it.
Yes.
That's the cold hard sort of numbers. But then there's also the other side of it. And I'd like you to tell us a little bit more about the other benefits they get, because it's far more than that, as well as a great feeling, but there's more than that.
Yeah, so we will often, we have banners and those sorts of things whenever we perform at our end of term concerts. We will always have our sponsors a logo, etc., name on those, and we always try to recognise them by personally thanking them at those concerts. It's also wonderful that, for example, I went to a Bendigo breakfast the other day, and they actually did a 3-minute video on one of the recipients of the Bendigo Bank Scholarship, who was a Year 6 student playing the clarinet. And it was at the coalface. You could actually see this young lady. She was so proud of what she did. And the feeling in the room was that that's a good thing. And I think that's what our donors like to feel, is that not only are they, parting with their cold hard cash, but they're actually making a difference to the community.
And they're connecting with community.
They are absolutely connecting. And I see parents and friends sitting in the hall watching these concerts, and they look and they see, wow, these businesses here on the Central Coast are choosing to fund the Central Coast Conservatorium of Music so that my child can be on that stage playing that instrument, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, fantastic. So can you share with us some of these, some of the events that you have as an example that share or express the vision and the purpose of the Central Coast Conservatorium of Music? Because you've told us about training children, and that's beautiful and it's endearing with Bendigo Bank. And that's sort of mainly all around students, right?
Yeah.
However, there's more that you do as well that
Absolutely.
involve the students but also do more. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So the great example I can give you is where we partner with Woy Woy Rotary Club to provide what we call Opera at the Arboretum, which is actually a concert that's at Pearl Beach. It's an open-air concert in the Arboretum down there. And our youth orchestra is about 18 students, actually rehearse with our artistic director, Patrick Brennan. And they rehearse for about 8 weeks beforehand every Saturday. They don't, it's their time that they give up. But we partner with Opera Australia, and they provide us opera singers. And
so we're talking world-class opera singers
absolutely, here. Yes, absolutely. So they provide it with 4 beautiful opera singers. We accompany them with the orchestra, and it's a 2-hour concert that the community come to. They bring their picnic blankets and their little picnic baskets, and they sit there listening to opera for 2 hours on a Saturday afternoon, and it is beautiful. We can have numbers of up to 1,000 people.
And the children are the ones that are playing the music that these
and they accompany
professional
world-class artists.
Wow.
It's such an opportunity for the students, but the real impact for me is the community.
Yeah.
The community comes here. They come from all around the Central Coast to be on a little grassy knoll watching 4 opera singers accompanied by Central Coast Conservatorium of Music.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful event. And it's the type of performance opportunities that we give to our students that they can say, you know what, I once performed with Opera Australia at Pearl Beach.
Yeah, fantastic. Lisa, thank you very much. You've shared with us your words of wisdom, your own personal journey, the work of the conservatorium, and we've gained a lot from that. It's been about leadership, about how the new age of leadership is coming around. It's strengthening every time that we get more and more women. Getting that 50-50, I think, is not necessarily a target we have to achieve, but it's something that we need to just have more equality in that. And definitely because of that, we get more power in our results and in our people's enjoyment to work, but still having the need for that hard-nosed making decisions. And you've shared with us. Thank you very much for your time, and we wish you and the conservatorium all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.